Hello and welcome to the latest installment of HFW Industry Insights, where we speak to leading figures across HFW's core sectors about the key issues facing their business and the market. Our guest today is Michael Gill. Michael is the Director of Legal Affairs and External Relations at ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization. ICAO is a United Nations agency, and it is responsible for establishing standards and regulations for the aviation industry worldwide. Civil aviation flights would not take place without it. Michael has spent more than 20 years in the aviation industry, establishing himself as a true leader in sustainable development. He previously headed the Air Transport Action Group, a global association working on long-term sustainability goals, and he has also spearheaded IATA's interaction with governments and business partners on sustainability regulation and policy. Michael, welcome. Michael, ICAO was founded in 1944, really at the birth of civil aviation. It celebrated its 80th anniversary last year. Maybe you could start by talking to us about ICAO and the role it plays in civil aviation globally today.
Yeah, hello, Giles, and thank you for the invitation to come and speak to you today. It's a real pleasure to talk about ICAO and its role in supporting civil aviation. As you said, it's a UN specialized agency. We were created by the Chicago Convention in 1944 when World War II was still raging in certain parts of the world. And it was intended to be a global forum, really to build consensus and agreement around international standards to regulate international civil aviation. At that time, it was recognized that the young and growing aviation sector needed international standards in order to develop on a global basis. And so ICAO brings together 193 member states through a variety of expert bodies, subsidiary bodies from the Assembly and the Council, Air Navigation Commission, and then a whole range of specialized committees and panels. And there are really three main areas of our work. Firstly, it's setting those common standards, whether that's the ICAO standards and recommended practices, guidance material, assembly resolutions, even international treaties. We then have a whole area of activity in auditing the safety and security performance of our member states through our global audit programs. And then thirdly, we support the implementation of those standards through helping states in capacity building and then implementation support. So broadly speaking, we cover off those three areas, but all of that work is done through building a broad consensus across the membership. From a legal perspective, ICAO's work is channeled through our legal committee, which has existed even longer in different forms, longer than the organization itself. And the ICAO legal committee has been responsible for the negotiation of nearly 25 international treaties, well known to many, either on the airline liability side through the Warsaw System, Montreal Convention of 1999, as well as then treaties on aircraft financing and aviation security. And the most recent ICAO treaty was the Montreal Protocol of 2014, which amended the Tokyo Convention to deal with the growing issue of unruly and disruptive passenger behavior.
So, Michael, I want to go back to the start of your time at ICAO, September 2021, during the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, one of the most disruptive periods in the history of aviation. What was that like for ICAO, and what was it like for you personally?
Well, I mean, on a personal level, it was extraordinary timing to join an organization like ICAO and take on a job like this one. Really joining an organization which was working extremely hard to try and maintain and rebuild the global connectivity of the air transport sector. We were a global organization with offices all around the world, staff all around the world, working in a virtual format. So much of ICAO's work is done in formal meetings through our subsidiary bodies, and particularly the council. All of that was happening virtually, which, as you can imagine, brought its own challenges. But at the same time, we were trying to keep a focus on the long-term strategy for the aviation sector, what would happen once recovery from COVID had been successfully managed. So it was certainly challenging trying to maintain all of those different moving parts, and as I say, join a senior management team where we were trying to motivate, collaborate with our staff on a remote basis, and continue our excellent relations with the governing body on a remote basis. What I would say is I think that whole process accelerated the modernization of ICAO as an organization itself. And there was new leadership at that time. New Secretary General Juan Carlos Salazar joined. President of the Council, Shakitano, was only 1 year into his term. I think it allowed them to accelerate their transformation and modernization of ICAO. We really had no option but to transform ICAO, working on different streams, working on processes, digitalization, looking for even greater operational efficiencies as an organization itself. So it was really a fascinating time to join the senior management team.
So coming forward to present day, ICAO recently published its business plan for 2026 to 2028. Tell us a bit about the organization's key priorities over that period.
Yeah, the business plan, which was developed over about a year and working hand in hand with our governing body, the council, really set for the first time 3 very key, but I think clear aspirations for the aviation sector: 0 fatalities, net zero emissions by 2050, and then building a connected, accessible air transport system which contributes to social and economic development. And as I say, those are key, concise, and I think achievable aspirations. That's then backed up by a series of strategic goals. No surprises there, focusing on safety, security, environment, capacity development for states. What I think is interesting, perhaps for your audience, is that for the first time, the international air law system was recognized as a strategic goal in itself. Often, the legal function in organizations is seen as merely a support function. But here, for the first time, it was recognized that upholding the internationally agreed rules-based system that ICAO functions on and which governs civil aviation is of itself an objective. And so ensuring that our legal framework adapts to changing circumstances to ensure it meets new and emerging challenges, but also it is applied in a consistent and clear way, consistently for all member states, was recognized as itself as a strategic goal for the organization. And I think certainly as a lawyer, that's extremely rewarding to see, and it really shows the value that's placed on the legal function in an organization like ICAO.
So ICAO meets in assembly once every 3 years. You have very recently finished your 42nd assembly. Tell us, Michael, about the key outcomes of that assembly, and tell us whether they support the business plan.
As you say, yeah, we just finished the assembly about 10 days ago, so we're all still recovering from what's a fairly intense experience, but a very successful one. Firstly, I would say that we saw record engagement at this year's assembly. 192 of our 193 member states participated. That's the highest ever participation we've had. And we had over 3,200 delegates here in Montreal over the 2-week period, looking at nearly 700 working papers for discussion. So just looking at the level of engagement, it shows that the interest and the commitment to ICAO is still there. As for the substantive outcomes, they really did, I think, echo what's set out in the strategic plan. So there were agreements on new global aviation safety plans, global air navigation plan to help improve safety air navigation, all working towards that 0 fatality aspiration. There were resolutions ensuring protection of civil aviation operating over or near conflict zones. There was enhancements to our oversight and audit programs. On the environment front, we had confirmation of the Assembly of the roadmap to net zero carbon emissions, strengthened commitment to CORSIA, the carbon offsetting and reduction scheme for aviation. There was confirmation of interim targets for sustainable aviation fuel deployment, so a collective target of 5% emissions reductions coming from SAF and other lower carbon fuels by 2030. So those all really mirrored what's set out in the business plan. On the political side, I should mention there were a number of resolutions passed condemning certain member states for breaches of the Chicago Convention. And I think, again, that shows the importance of the rule of law underpinning all of what ICAO does, because it calls for accountability and respect for the principles and the provisions of the convention. From an internal perspective, we were happy to see a budget approved for the coming 3-year period. And again, calls for ICAO to continue on this transformation journey towards greater efficiency and transparency. And that really, that's no small thing as you can imagine, in the current global financial climate. But overall, really strong consensus, strong engagement. I think a recognition of aviation's importance and also a clear call to action for ICAO to support states and the industry in moving ahead with that.
Michael, much has been said and published about ICAO's work around the environment and carbon emissions. And some might say that there's an inherent tension here involved in more airline traffic on the one hand and reducing the industry's environmental impact. How does ICAO and its members, how do they resolve those tensions?
I think really it's a question about of balance, because you're trying to balance development and growth of the sector with environmental responsibility, and and that fundamental balance is reflected in the different initiatives that have happened under ICAO. So the long-term aspirational goal of net zero emissions by 2050, the targets on SAF deployment, the implementation of CORSIA. It's really recognized that it's a balancing act. And so on the one hand, all of these targets are premised on this being a basket of measures, and there's no one single solution that everybody is focusing on. So you're able to achieve these targets either through in-sector emissions reductions, technological innovations, operational improvements, sustainable aviation fuel, or through the market-based measure CORSIA. So it allows the industry to invest in emissions reductions wherever it sees the best opportunities. I think that's a really important point. But also importantly, the goal itself is a collective global aspirational goal. It doesn't attribute specific obligations or commitments to individual states. And so each state is able to achieve the goal in accordance with its own national circumstances. So I think that's really important. It means that there's no individual attribution of a target. This is seen as a collective responsibility, and so the special circumstances, national circumstances of individual states are recognised in the whole way that the LTAG is structured and the way that CORSIA is structured.
You mentioned, Michael, the 193 member states who have recently participated in the Assembly. And of course, as a UN agency, ICAO relies on those states implementing into their national laws the recommendations which ICAO makes. Tell us, do the heightened geopolitical tensions, do they affect the ability of ICAO to achieve the consensus necessary to be effective?
Well, I mean, I think the fact that we have 192 of our member states coming to the Assembly, discussing, negotiating, and reaching consensus on a whole range of resolutions, which covers off all areas of operation, safety, security, environment, legal aspects. I think it shows that all of them, despite their political differences, believe in what ICAO is trying to achieve, which is a common and commonly agreed and harmonized future development for the aviation sector. I think that's pretty impressive when you consider those geopolitical tensions out there. What I would say is that although much of what ICAO produces is what you might call soft law, so the standards and recommended practices, the assembly resolutions, it's possible for states to file differences or reservations to them. And although ICAO doesn't have any enforcement power as such, I think the fact that any state who wants to file a difference or a reservation, if it finds it's not able to comply, the fact that it has to do so means that by definition, there is an obligation inherent in respecting the consensus that's been built across ICAO, certainly from an international law perspective. And so we feel that the inherent balance and structure of this system means that while there's no enforcement power, there is a high level of compliance and respect. And of course, there are mechanisms for the Assembly and the Council to consider and condemn potential violations of provisions of the convention itself. So there may not be enforcement powers, but giving those strong political statements from our governing bodies is important. It does have impact, and we've seen some recent very important decisions in that regard.
Michael, finishing up some quick fire questions. You have a very busy and responsible job in a very busy organization that has just come through a very busy period indeed in relation to the Assembly. What do you do to unwind?
Well, Giles, not very original, but away from work, I try and focus on sport in general, football in particular, playing, spectating two young kids who are somewhat football obsessed, and then watching the Scottish Football League as much as I can. And I'd say that really takes up the little spare time that I have.
And you've been living in Montreal now for 4 years? Is there a kind of must-do thing for any visitor to Montreal?
Well, I'd say if you work in the aviation sector, you have to come and visit ICAO. We have a really quite interesting headquarters building here. It's now getting towards 40 years old. A lot of the recent history of aviation has been made in this building. And we do have a pretty interesting museum, and the building itself is laid out with a number of pieces of artwork gifted by member states, as well as aviation artifacts. So for aviation people, it's a pretty interesting place to come and visit. But more generally, what I really like in Montreal is the fact that we have this mountain right in the middle of the city. It's accessible, but it gives you some pretty incredible views of the city and of the region. And so if you have only an afternoon spare in Montreal, I'd say wander up to the top of Mont-Royal.
And lastly, Michael, ICAO has set ambitious targets for 2050, 0 emissions, 0 fatalities. How confident do you feel about those objectives?
Well, as a lawyer, of course, Giles, I'm not going to put a percentage figure on it, but we are very optimistic. Aviation has faced these, huge challenges in the past. And we've managed to achieve them. There is clear aspirations in place and clear roadmaps to back up both our 0 fatalities and net 0 emissions targets. What I think is really important is that we now have commitment from member states on a almost universal basis, very much consensus based, and we have the buy-in from the industry. This is something where, to my mind, ICAO, member states, industry are completely aligned. And with that, I think the chances of us succeeding in achieving the targets are very high, and we're optimistic about it. But there is urgency. There's no question. Certainly on the net 0 emissions target, the time is absolutely of the essence.
Michael, thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you, Giles. An absolute pleasure.